Hi everyone, this video is the second part in a two-part series on the regional differences of the United States. The order you watch them in isn't particularly important, but I explained my methodology and reasoning for how I divvied up the regions in the first part, as well as gave some context for the sheer massive size of the United States. If you want to watch this one first, go ahead, but keep in mind that if you have any questions for how I did this, they'll probably be answered in that first video. You should also definitely watch both, as you won't be able to get the full picture of the country just by looking at half of its regions. That's enough of an introduction. Let's dive right into it and move into the western half of the country. Hello and welcome to That Is Interesting. I'm your host, Carter. Today, the second video in a two-part series on the vast regional differences of the United States. Explained. If you're driving west across the Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, or Texas, somewhere you'll notice the landscape start to change. It's a subtle difference, but an important one. The lusher Midwest becomes drier and more arid, as elevation slowly but consistently creeps upwards towards the Rockies, and we move into the sixth region on this list, the Great Plains. Unlike the lusher Midwest, this is an area that receives far less rainfall. Prairie land still exists here, sometimes home to herds of bison, in areas where establishing agriculture has been too challenging, either because of soil quality, the drier landscape, or difficult topography. You might not expect this, but small mountains, hills, buttes, and canyons dot much of the Great Plains. Both geographically as well as culturally, it's something of a mix between the Midwest and the Mountain West. I've drawn the Great Plains as including the western two-thirds of North Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, and Oklahoma, as well as the majority of Texas and South Dakota except for the western and easternmost sections, and I've also included the eastern edges of Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. It's home to 24.38 million people, or 7.34% of the country, but nearly 19 million of them live in one state, Texas. More than 3 million live in Oklahoma, and the remaining 8 states that have land in the Great Plains, that land is only home to a collective 2 million people. The region's population perhaps could even be lower. Of the parts of Texas and Oklahoma that included, the heavily populated areas receive rainfall more on par with parts of the South and Midwest and the Great Plains. I chose to put them there more because of cultural similarities than geographic ones. Although this was part of the country that was difficult to place culturally as well, it really could have gone a number of ways. Unsurprisingly, all the major cities in the region are in Texas and Oklahoma. In the first tier are Dallas, San Antonio, and Austin, and in the second tier, Oklahoma City, McAllen, and Tulsa. While the more arid climate of the plains makes a large population difficult to begin with, the colder weather further north only adds another layer to the challenge of living there. Most of the population centers in Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas are all in the eastern halves of the state, areas that included the Midwest. While the Midwest is dominated by corn and soy, the plains is home to a crop that requires much less water, wheat. There's also another huge industry that isn't agricultural, oil. Over 40% of all oil produced in the U.S. comes from Texas, and 12% is from North Dakota. Many of the other top oil producers are also at least partially located in the Great Plains. New Mexico, Colorado, Oklahoma, and Wyoming are all also in the top 10. Cattle ranching is huge as well in the vast grasslands, and the relatively empty landscape in the northern part of the plains means that most of the country's nuclear weapons are stored there. This is an area that was traversed by settlers moving from the eastern part of the country, hoping to own a farm or homestead or strike it rich further west. The native people who lived there were often killed or forced onto small reservations on poorer land. Because the land was relatively worse for agriculture and because of the direction of American settlement spread, this western U.S., including the Great Plains, are today home to far larger Native American populations than the East. Oklahoma, which was originally set aside as a territory reserved for Native Americans, has the second highest percentage of indigenous residents in the country, 13.6%. And New Mexico, South Dakota, Montana, North Dakota, and Wyoming are all in the top 10. They often face major economic challenges. South Dakota's Oglala Lakota County, home to the Pine Ridge Reservation, is the poorest county of any U.S. state, with a per capita income of less than $9,000, a third of the national average. On top of a large Native American population, most of the Great Plains followed settlement patterns of the Midwest, as Midwesterners, many of German and Norwegian ancestry, moved further west. Texas is a bit of an outlier, another reason it could have been drawn as its own region. Once part of Spain and then Mexico, it's home to a huge Mexican-American population, nearly 35% of the state, and they've had a major influence in the state's history and culture. Though people might imagine little more than fields and pastures, the Great Plains is one of the most geographically fascinating parts of the country, and is home to areas of incredible scenery that you might not expect to find. There's the stunning landscape of South Dakota's vast Badlands, the canyons of North Dakota's Theodore Roosevelt National Park, the mountains, buttes, and salt flats of Oklahoma, Texas's incredible Palo Duro Canyon, and the sand hills of Nebraska, an enormous swath of sand dunes which grass grew on top of, creating weak sandy soil, which has led much of the state to be nearly uninhabited, instead used to graze cattle and fill a massive aquifer. Culturally a bit of a mix between the Midwest and Mountain West, the Great Plains is a sparsely populated but economically essential part of the country, home to some of the most fascinating and unusual geographic features in the United States. The Great Plains continue to rise until we reach the front range of the Rocky Mountains and enter the largest region I've set aside, the Mountain West. I've included it in the western edges of South Dakota and Texas, most of Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico, the entirety of Idaho, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, and the eastern parts of Washington, Oregon, and California. It's home to 33.3 million people, or 10.03% of the country. That's a lot, but far fewer than you'd expect for such a massive region. The tiny Mid-Atlantic, which could easily fit into any one of the Mountain West states, is home to 10 million more people than the entire region. The reason behind this is simple: challenging topography and lack of water. Much of the region, especially in its southern half, is a huge desert. Areas that are less arid are often massive mountain ranges, and as the name would suggest, the region is filled with mountains. Hemmed in by the Rockies to the east and the Cascades and Sierra Nevada to the west, the land in between is in places the driest and hottest in the country, and filled with terrain that makes settlement incredibly difficult. Surprisingly though, it's home to a number of major cities. The difference is that small towns are far less common. There's less usable land available for them, and in such a challenging environment, it makes more sense to pool one's resources. For example, Nevada, the 7th largest state by area in the entire country, is home to only 17 incorporated towns or cities, and nearly 3/4 of the entire state's population lives in Las Vegas's Clark County. Water usage and water rights are a huge issue as water is so limited, and cities which get early access to coveted water sources like the Colorado River, Rio Grande, Snake, and Columbia have a huge advantage over potential rivals. Another reason the region sees so many of its residents living in large cities while smaller towns are relatively uncommon. Its first-tier cities include Phoenix, Denver, Las Vegas, and Salt Lake City, and in the second tier are cities like Tucson, El Paso, Albuquerque, Colorado Springs, and Ogden. Like the Great Plains, the states of the Mountain West are home to some of the largest Native American populations in the country. The Navajo Nation, for example, is the largest reservation in the country, sitting within 3 states and taking up more land than 10. I could have split the region into 2 sections. The Southwest is very distinct on its own, with a much more desert-like environment and huge Spanish and Mexican history and influence. However, both share a number of cultural and geographic similarities as well, and the boundaries of the Southwest would have overlapped with a number of other regions. In the Southwest, many residents have Mexican ancestry. In the northern states of the Mountain West, most are descendants of Germans and Scandinavians from the Midwest. In the center of the region, Utah and parts of Idaho and Nevada around it are an outlier in terms of settlement. Most residents are descendants of English settlers from the northeastern U.S., who moved there as a result of the migration of members of the LDS Church from the northeast through the Midwest and finally to Utah. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, whose members are often referred to as Mormons, was a religious movement founded in upstate New York, who, often facing persecution, made their way west, finally settling in the West, where they built a society they called Deseret, centered around Salt Lake City. The tightly knit religious community settled and irrigated much of the desert, and today dominates society in Utah, where they make up over 55% of the population. Additionally, in Idaho, they make up a large chunk of the population at 19%. Across the region, there's generally a culture of independence and self-reliance, and residents often enjoy and make frequent use of the nature at their doorstep, from skiing and hiking to hunting, backpacking, rock climbing, or horseback riding. There's no shortage of outdoor activities available. The Mountain West is home to some of the most famous and spectacular scenery in the United States, and it varies widely based on where in the region you are. It's home to both lush pine forests and deep blue lakes alongside deserts of red rocks and stunning cliffs and canyons. Places like Lake Tahoe, Grand Teton, Yosemite, Yellowstone, the Grand Canyon, the Rockies of Colorado, the Great Salt Lake and Bonneville Salt Flats, the White Sands of New Mexico, the forests of central Arizona, the lava flows of Idaho's Craters of the Moon, the Black Hills of South Dakota, Devil's Tower, Crater Lake, Death Valley, Arches, Zion, Joshua Tree, Sequoia, and the Palouse and channeled scablands of eastern Washington are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the unparalleled scenery and fascinating landscapes of the Mountain West. 28 of the country's 63 national parks sit in this part of the country. In fact, nearly half of the western U.S. is federal land. On top of national parks and national forests, huge military installations and testing sites take up much of the region. States like Nevada are filled with them, and much of the construction and testing of the nuclear bomb was done in the Mountain West in secrecy and isolation. Much of the region has grown in population only in recent decades. Construction of dams in the Colorado River created reservoirs and energy providers that allowed cities like Las Vegas and Phoenix to explode in population. With the creation of air conditioning, the hot Southwest became livable and the region's cities began to grow, with vast plots of suburbia spreading across the desert and creating some of the country's most sprawling car-dependent cities. This came with the growth of the Sun Belt across not only the Southwest but California and Florida as well. Retirees from colder areas called sunbirds began wintering in the Southwest, and most of the region's states have seen their populations increase many times over in the past half century alone as transplants from across the country move there. In the past 2 years, the 5 fastest growing states in the country are all located at least partially in the Mountain West. Idaho at number 1, followed by Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and Texas. In the coming years, the Mountain West is likely to grow even more and remain an increasingly influential part of the country, though issues with drought and water shortages are likely to be exacerbated by both a warming climate and a booming population. The last of the 8 larger regions in this list is the 3rd largest in population, the West Coast, which includes the portions of California, Oregon, and Washington sitting west of the Cascades and Sierra Nevada, is home to 43.5 million people, or 13.11% of the country. These western parts, hugging the coast of the Pacific Ocean, are each home to the vast majority of their state's populations, and are geographically and culturally worlds apart. The rain shadow effect leaves areas on the coastal sides of the mountains greener, while the other side is much more arid. The Pacific Northwest is the rainiest part of the contiguous U.S., and even in dry Southern California, the land along the coast is much greener than the desert on the other side of the mountains. Excellent natural ports, a lusher landscape, flat and fertile agricultural valleys, and in Southern California, warm and pleasant weather has led the area to become incredibly urbanized, California especially. In fact, the total population of the West Coast, as I've defined it, is hardly more than the population of California alone. Even adding the huge population centers of Western Oregon and Washington only makes up for and adds a little more to the population of California that included the Mountain West. That population, parts of suburban LA's Inland Empire, really should be considered part of the West Coast, but the counties they're a part of take up so much of the Mojave Desert that I felt they had to be included in that region. The West Coast is home to huge Tier 1 cities, including Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, San Diego, Portland, and Sacramento, and smaller cities in the second tier like Fresno and Bakersfield. Los Angeles is enormous. The 2nd largest city in the country, it's a huge center of entertainment, home to the country's film industry, some of the country's busiest ports, and 12 million people. The San Francisco Bay Area, surrounding one of the country's best natural harbors, is also one of the 10 largest urban areas in the country, the center of America's tech industry, and one of the most expensive places to live in the U.S. San Diego sits south of Los Angeles, their suburbs overlapping to form a heavily populated coastal metropolis stretching across the border into the Mexican city of Tijuana. The largest valley in the country, the Central Valley, occupies much of California's interior and plays an essential role in American agriculture. Flat, warm, and with low rainfall, it's fed by snowmelt from the Sierra Nevada, which sits to its east. The clear skies, predictable weather, and flat land have allowed farmers to grow a variety of crops that isn't possible nearly anywhere else in the country, thanks to a year-round growing season and the ability to control how much water crops receive thanks to irrigation fed by an enormous system of canals and mountain dams. These advantages have made it incredibly productive. It makes up just 1% of the country's agricultural land, but a quarter of all food produced in the U.S. comes from there, everything from rice to almonds to oranges and grapes. It's truly essential to feeding the country and is home to a huge population, with cities like Sacramento, Fresno, and Bakersfield sitting between the mountains and the farms. Oregon's agricultural Willamette Valley is a rare section of flat land in a mostly mountainous state, and the valley is home to 70% of its population, including its largest city, Portland. Washington's population center surrounds Puget Sound, a huge system of fjords and channels that cut deep inland, filling the forested and mountainous state with islands and peninsulas. Its largest cities, Seattle, and smaller cities like Tacoma and Olympia, all line the Sound. Many of the West Coast's rural areas are heavily populated as well, some counties home to hundreds of thousands of people just due to the many smaller cities that line the coast and nearby valleys. Many different colonial powers wanted the West Coast, even Russia established settlements along the coastline. However, like much of the Southwest, California was successfully colonized by Spain and later became part of Mexico, while Washington and Oregon were part of a large fur trading territory disputed between the U.S. and Britain. Even after the US consolidated control over them, the Pacific coast remained a frontier. Wild, dangerous, and places sparsely populated, it was a land of unknowns. The discovery of gold in the mountains outside Sacramento fast-tracked California's statehood and sparked a rush to move west, as many Americans packed up their belongings to seek fortune on the other side of the country. Stagecoaches, trails, and eventually a transcontinental railroad brought hundreds of thousands of people to the West Coast, and in Washington and Oregon, settlers arrived seeking jobs in fishing, agriculture, lumber, and industry in the resource-rich Pacific Northwest. The West Coast was already home to a large Native American population, and in California, once part of Mexico, many people had Mexican ancestry. At the same time, the port cities of the West Coast became destinations for immigrants from the other side of the Pacific. Asian immigrants arrived in cities like San Francisco and Seattle, while immigrants from Mexico and other parts of Latin America found homes across California, moving to both urban and rural areas, where they often worked in agriculture in places like the Central Valley and Salinas Valley. California has the second highest proportion of Latino residents and Asian American residents in the country, and Washington is third by percent Asian American. These more recent immigrants, coupled with transplants from other parts of the U.S., have made the West Coast one of the most diverse parts of the country, and it's often rare to meet anyone whose family has been there longer than a generation or two. Though they are starting to taper off, in recent decades the states have boomed in population, California rising to become the most populous in the country. Though California and the Pacific Northwest are very different, there are also lots of similarities across the West Coast. They're culturally diverse, politically liberal, and have a generally relaxed and laid-back attitude, caring less about formalities. For example, it's often the norm to see people going to work in more casual attire, whereas in other parts of the country that would be unheard of. Unsurprisingly, it has some of the best Asian and Mexican food in the country, and the West Coast's many different immigrant groups have shaped its culture significantly. Home to Hollywood and many of the country's celebrities and film studios, it plays an outsized role in American media and culture. Southern California especially is a place that's familiar to everyone. Like everywhere, there are huge income disparities, but on the West Coast, high costs of living, influenced by limited availability of land, has exacerbated them. Housing costs are some of the highest in the country, and homelessness is a major and growing problem. It's the center of America's tech and entertainment industries, and these high-paying jobs in places like the Silicon Valley and Seattle contribute to rising costs. San Francisco is usually ranked the most expensive city to live in the country, and the rest of these lists are often dominated by other West Coast cities. Natural disasters are a major problem. The San Andreas Fault has produced some devastating earthquakes, and wildfires and droughts have become commonplace across the entire region, made even worse by a changing climate. All these challenges will be major issues facing the West Coast in coming years, but no region is without its issues, and it's foolish to say that the West Coast doesn't have a lot going for it. Its crucial role in the U.S. economy, for starters. Like the Mountain West, the people of the West Coast have nature at their doorstep and make use of it. Surfing, skiing, hiking, practically any type of adventure sport or recreational activity you can imagine is possible on the West Coast, and its natural beauty is spectacular. In the Pacific Northwest, you have the stunning peaks of the Cascades, volcanoes like Mount Rainier and Mount Hood towering above Seattle and Portland. You have the lush rainforest of the Olympic Peninsula, the beautiful San Juan Islands, the scenic Oregon coast, the Columbia River Gorge, California's rugged and wild Lost Coast, Redwood National Park, Point Reyes, the wine country that stretches from Santa Rosa to Santa Barbara, the redwood forests around Santa Cruz, the stunning stretch of coastline known as Big Sur, the enormous Guadalupe Dunes, the Channel Islands, and too many beautiful places to name. The West Coast is a remarkable and fascinating part of the country, and I'm happy to have been able to call it home for much of my life. I've made it through all the large regions in this list, but we aren't quite done with the country yet. The next few regions are all either smaller in area or population or both, so I'm going to spend less time on them than I did with the others. Up next, we have the Caribbean, with 11.16 million people, or 3.36% of the country. I've drawn it to include the southern tip of Florida, as well as the entirety of Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. It's important to remember that though they share a general physical proximity and some commonalities, each of these parts of the Caribbean are very different and culturally distinct from one another. It's home to two cities in the first tier, Miami and San Juan, and two in the second tier, Sarasota and Cape Coral. South Florida is the most similar of this region to the rest of the U.S., but it really didn't make sense to include it in the South. There's a saying about Florida, the further north you go, the more southern it gets, and this is very true. Florida, but especially South Florida, is a huge cultural outlier. Retirees and sunbirds from other parts of the country, like New York, move there for the sun, and much of the state is taken up by huge sprawling developments with a very suburban feel. Miami is the fourth largest urban area in the entire country and a huge destination for tourists. It's also a major center for immigration from across Latin America and the Caribbean, but especially Cuba, which sits less than 200 miles from the city. Nearly 35% of the city's residents are Cuban, and as the urban core of South Florida, they've helped make the city very culturally Caribbean and Latin American. Puerto Rico is the most populous U.S. territory. It's densely populated, centered around San Juan, which is the country's 21st largest city, but people live all around the coast of the mountainous tropical island. The island speaks Spanish and is often considered one of the most probable candidates to become the 51st state, considering it's a U.S. territory despite having more residents than 21 different states. Poverty is a major problem on the island. The average household in Puerto Rico makes less than half that of the average household in Mississippi, the country's poorest state, and the island's territorial status means that issues are not able to be dealt with as effectively, something that was evident in the federal government's response to the devastation brought by Hurricane Maria. Though they lie not far from Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands are a world apart. They're a majority black former Danish colony that's linguistically diverse, mostly English-speaking with large Spanish and French-speaking minorities. And each of the three main islands, St. John, St. Thomas, and St. Croix, have different dialects and cultures from one another, and part of the territory is preserved as the beautiful Virgin Islands National Park. The Caribbean is one of the most ethnically and linguistically diverse as well as culturally rich parts of the country, but in the territories exist major issues with poverty. On top of that, hurricanes devastate the region year after year, destroying houses and infrastructure and shutting down power and water lines. It's an important, fascinating, and highly populated part of the U.S., which is often overlooked as a region due to the territorial status of much of it. The next region is Hawaii, home to 1.46 million people, or 0.46% of the country. Its borders are pretty simple, just the state of Hawaii. Sometimes regional divisions of the country will throw Hawaii and Alaska together or put them both on the west coast, but they are just so far away and as such are incredibly different from each other and the west coast. California, for example, is closer to Vermont than it is to Hawaii. The state, made up of a chain of large volcanic islands in the middle of the Pacific, is the only U.S. state that isn't located in North America. It's part of Oceania. It has one second-tier city, Honolulu, which on the urbanized island of Oahu is its main urban center. It and its suburbs home to 55% of the entire state's population. Sitting in the tropics, it's the southernmost U.S. state, with warm weather and the heaviest rainfall in the country. Kauai's Mount Waialeale is the wettest place in the country and among the rainiest on Earth. This heavy rainfall and tropical climate, coupled with the fact that the entire island chain is volcanic, has given it some of the most unique and spectacular landscapes in the country. Dense, lush rainforests hug mountainsides as cliffs dive dramatically into the ocean. At the same time, wind patterns have prevented some parts of the island from receiving significant rainfall, creating a fascinating situation where stretches of barren, rocky land and beautiful rainforests teeming with life occupy the same island. Volcanic areas like Haleakala National Park look like they could be the landscape of another planet, and in fact, astronauts train on the peaks of Mauna Loa, living in a habitat there for months to prepare them for a potential Mars mission. Located in the Pacific, partway between North America and Asia, the state has a foot in both continents. The islands were an independent kingdom, home to native Hawaiians, a Polynesian people, who lived there for over 1,000 years before a group of American businessmen, hoping to take advantage of its climate and soil to grow tropical crops like sugarcane, pineapple, rice, and coffee, overthrew the government and established their own, which was annexed by the U.S. soon after. The plantations of the islands were often worked by indentured servants in dangerous conditions. Many of the workers who came to Hawaii were immigrants from Asia, Japanese, Filipino, Chinese, and Okinawan immigrants to name a few, and today their descendants make up the largest racial group on the island. People moved there from the mainland U.S. as well, as it became an important military outpost, and to take advantage of the warm weather, beaches, and beautiful scenery. Today, it's one of the country's most diverse states, with no single racial group making up more than 40% of the population. It's home to large Asian, white, Native Hawaiian, and Latino populations, and a quarter of the state's residents are multiracial. The state is heavily dependent on tourism, to the extent that the industry often overwhelms its residents, raises prices, and damages its environment. Being so physically isolated from the rest of the country contributes to its challenges. Though Hawaiians do pretty well in terms of per capita income, the cost of living is far and away the highest in the country, 30% higher than that of the second most expensive state, New York. Hawaii isn't the only state located so far from the rest of the country. Alaska has a population half the size of Hawaii at 0.73 million people, or just 0.22% of the U.S., but an enormous land area, a fifth the size of the lower 48 states. Sitting between the Arctic and Pacific Oceans on the northwestern tip of North America, its southernmost point is still further north than any major city in Canada. Though the entire state is usually quite cold, it takes up such an enormous land area that encompasses a huge variety of landscapes. It's 2,250 miles from the tip of the Alaska Panhandle to the end of the Aleutian Islands. Travel that same distance in the other direction, and you'd be in Arkansas. It's home to vast plains, the tallest mountains on the continent, river deltas, tundras, forests, and glaciers, fjords, spits, sand dunes, and islands. The Alaska Panhandle is a string of huge offshore islands and tall coastal peaks crisscrossed with fjords, relatively close to British Columbia's Haida Gwaii archipelago, and it shares a similar landscape to the island-lined coast of the Canadian province. So much further to the south, it's relatively warm compared to much of the state. Further north, the glaciers and snow-capped peaks of the St. Elias Mountains, Wrangell Mountains, and the Alaska Range are among the tallest mountains in the world. Denali is the tallest on the continent. There's the fjord-filled Kenai Peninsula. On the other side of it sits Cook Inlet, home to Anchorage and most of the state's population. The enormous Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutian Islands, which extend off of it, make up an enormous chain of volcanoes. Incredibly isolated and at times thousands of miles from Anchorage, the Aleutians and islands in the Bering Sea like St. Paul Island, St. Lawrence Island, and Little Diomede Island, which is famously just 2 miles from Russia, are some of the most remote places in the country. In the north, the Brooks Range separates the interior of the state from an enormous coastal plain, a vast tundra along the Arctic Ocean, home to only a few isolated communities. Nicknamed the Last Frontier, Alaska is so enormous and far away from most major population centers that it's the least visited state in the country, and many Americans know very little about it, despite its stunning geography. The Yukon is the third largest river in the country, after just the Mississippi and Missouri. Lake Iliamna is the country's second largest freshwater lake after the Great Lakes, and every single one of the 10 tallest mountains in the U.S. is located in the state, as are 23 of the 30 largest islands in the country, including Kodiak Island, the second largest island in the U.S. It has an economy dominated by resource extraction. Oil is huge, as is timber, fishing, and mining. So far from the rest of the country, its residents are very independent-minded, and that shows itself politically. It's also very multicultural. A former Russian colony, Russian influence is still visible in some areas. The Russian Orthodox Church, for example, is much larger in Alaska than in other states, with 5% of Alaskans belonging to the denomination. 15% of the state's residents are Alaska Native, a broad classification for a variety of different groups of people indigenous to the state, and the highest percentage of indigenous residents in any state. Many people from the contiguous U.S. poured into the state during a number of gold rushes in Alaska and the neighboring Canadian territory of Yukon, causing the population to boom. But oil brought the largest explosion in population. Migrants from other parts of the U.S., as well as immigrants from Asia, most notably the Philippines, came to work in the oil and mining industries, and in recent decades, Alaska's population has increased significantly. Though considering how large the state is, it has by far the lowest population density of any state in the country. The final 2 regions on this list are some of the most far-flung parts of the United States, comprising 3 territories that many Americans often forget about, far into the Pacific. I've grouped Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands together because they are right next to each other, part of the same island chain, the Marianas, which is together home to 200,000 people, or just 0.06% of the country. A chain of volcanic islands, they sit in the western Pacific in the region of Oceania, known as Micronesia, between Japan, the Philippines, Palau, the Federated States of Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands. The islands of Guam and Saipan are densely populated and urbanized, while most of the other islands are relatively rural, if not uninhabited. Similar to Hawaii, these are tropical volcanic islands, home to lush rainforests and beautiful mountain peaks. They sit along the Mariana Trench, the deepest place on the surface of the Earth, and part of the trench sits within U.S. territorial waters. Unsurprisingly, due to their location, the islands are very diverse. No one ethnic group makes up a majority, but there are large populations of Chamorro, the indigenous people to the Marianas, as well as Filipinos, whose ancestors migrated there in large numbers seeking work and a better life in the 1940s. On top of that, there is a small white population from the contiguous U.S., as well as people with ancestry from other parts of Asia, such as Korea, Japan, and China, as well as other parts of Oceania. Colonized by Spain and then the U.S., they have influence from both, and are very linguistically diverse. Chamorro, English, and Tagalog are spoken by large chunks of the population. In Oceania as well, in the region of Polynesia, American Samoa sits in the South Pacific just east of the country of Samoa, and consists of 3 main islands. Again, these are mountainous volcanic islands covered in beautiful lush rainforests, with a truly remarkable landscape. Much of the territory is part of the stunning National Park of American Samoa, with geography and wildlife that you would not expect to find in the United States. They're culturally and linguistically unified with the country of Samoa. The overwhelming majority of residents are ethnically Samoan and speak the Samoan language. About half speak English as a second language. They were colonized in 1899, partitioned between the U.S. and Germany. The German islands have since become independent, but American Samoa, home to just under 50,000 residents, or 0.02% of the US, has remained in a difficult position. They're the only place in the entire US where residents don't receive US citizenship by being born there. While all US territories are in a strange and challenging political position, this adds an extra layer of difficulty to life in American Samoa, a place with a fascinating history and culture, and some of the most beautiful and unique landscapes to be found anywhere in the country. That's it for part 2. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, make sure you go give it a watch. On top of that, if you wish I'd gone more in depth on specific places in this video, I have good news for you. I'm nearly halfway through a 56-part series providing an in-depth analysis in every state, territory, and federal district in the country. It's called The US Explained, and if you like this video, it'll be right up your alley. I'm also considering turning this video into a series. I've already made a regional breakdown of California, and there are a few other states with major regional differences, as well as other large countries like Canada, Australia, China, Russia, Brazil, and so on, that could be really interesting to explore. So if you'd like to see these regional breakdown videos become an ongoing series, please leave a comment and let me know. I want to give a big thank you to everyone who's already joined my Patreon. Through it, you can access different things such as behind-the-scenes videos, early access to maps I create, an exclusive Discord Q&A with me, ad-free content, and shoutouts to my videos. Please be sure to check out the TII store, where you'll be able to purchase all sorts of official That Is Interesting products and merchandise, including shirts, hoodies, embroidered beanies, masks, mugs, embroidered backpacks, laptop stickers and sleeves, and so on. I really appreciate the well over 700 of you who have already joined my Discord server. If you haven't joined the Discord server yet, it's a great place to continue conversations about the topics discussed in these videos, interact with fellow viewers, and help provide information and suggestions for future videos. It's a great community, and we do fun stuff like geography game nights, live podcasts, and so on. I'll put links to both the Patreon and the Discord in the comments. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you learned something new. Subscribe for more content like this. I cover the countries, cities, people, and places of the world and beyond. These videos will leave you saying, that is interesting.